Welcome to Cloning 102. This is the second cloning class that I've taught here at Oregon's Constant Gardener. And again, my name is Erika Winters. I'm the Outreach and Education Director. And I also do the sales and large farm accounts for Oregon's Constant Gardener. So good morning and welcome to our cloning class. I always like to start the morning with a round of introductions. So of course our theme today is cloning. So I'd love to hear briefly from everyone. Just share your name if you're comfortable, and then tell us a cloning technique you've used in the past or one that you would like to learn. So again, my name is Erika, and I really want to figure out tissue culture, so that's something I'm going to touch on really briefly today for y'all. We'll send it this. As always, I'm trying to pack a ton of stuff into our hour and a half. We're going to talk very briefly about the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction in plants, just so we're very clear about the different ways in which you can breed and continue a genetic line. And then we'll talk a little bit about the botany behind cloning. Is this a little loud for folks? Is that okay? All right. I want to show some of the best tools and techniques. Sharp is safe, and we're going to go over all the different types of pruners, scalpels, and cutting devices that you can use. And then I'll talk about the hormones and stimulants. Chris mentioned a number of hormones that have jumpstarted the cloning process. It makes a real big difference. And then there's a lot of different medias, from just dirt and sticking the cutting in there to pumice to perlite. So I'm going to show some of the different options that are available on the market for you. And then we're going to talk about the all-important cut, that 45-degree angle that Susan mentioned. And my goal today is for everybody to make several cuts so you feel real comfortable doing that. We'll talk about how to care for the clones that you've just taken. We'll talk a little bit about tissue culture, and then I'm really going to focus on the most common mistakes at the end so that we can avoid the pitfalls that especially the summer season brings. So real briefly, the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction in plants. Does anyone want to just take a quick stab at it? It's hot, it's early. What's necessary for sexual reproduction in plants? Seeds, yeah, flowers. So there's a male and a female component that come together to fertilize and create a seed. So that's what we're talking about. When we're going into different types of plants, for those of you who can see dioecious versus monoecious flower structure at the bottom here. So in terms of sexual reproduction, there are plants that have both male and female parts on the same plant. And that would be known as monoecious. Tomatoes, peppers, these are great examples of both male and female flowers coming together to fertilize and create fruit on the same plant. And then as far as dioecious plants go, this is a little bit more rare in nature. And of course, one of our favorite plants, cannabis, is one of the most famous dioecious plants out there. And again, that means you have a male plant and you have a female plant, and they have to be in close proximity to pollinate each other to create that seed. There's a couple other examples out there, mulberries, ginkgos, kiwis. There's a lot of plants out there that are dioecious. Asparagus is another one of my favorite examples. So when you go to the nursery, you have to ask what gender you're purchasing. Especially for asparagus, there are preferential crops to eat between the two genders. So you definitely want to dig a little deeper and get that information. So I wanted to just touch really briefly on some flower morphology. Morphology is like anatomy for plants, the different structures that we're looking at when we look at the flower structures here. Most of you will be familiar with the pistil, especially on the cannabis plant. I like to think of that as the catcher's glove for the pollen, and those resins that are very sticky, and that long protruding length helps catch that pollen from the male plant very well. Anthers, stamen, filament, these all create different parts of the flower structure. And I love this little picture in the bottom corner of the honeybee. So again, nature is helping us in plants that are open pollinated. So we're looking for wind to carry that pollen to create a fertilization, or we're looking for a little helper, like a bee, or there are a lot of beneficial insects we don't even think of as pollinators, like moths, wasps, bats. There's a lot of different creatures out there that help spread pollen throughout the world. So this is really important to make seed. So again, with asexual reproduction as a contrast, you don't have a male and a female to come together to create a new generation. What you're doing is you're using a series of techniques to create a vegetative reproduction, or an asexual reproduction. So that can be done from root matter. Rhizomes can be divided, and you can create whole new plants. And this is cloning. They are genetically identical to the mother plant from which you cloned or divided them from. So this is a really great way to separate and share. For instance, I will be dividing all of my marshmallow this fall, and about 50% of it will go to my friends. and then I'll separate those and space them so that they produce better next year. So there's a lot of plants you can divide every couple of years to propagate. Layering is a really neat technique. I'll show you here a picture here in just a second. It's another way of asexual reproducing on a live plant, which is kind of interesting. Cuttings we're going to go over today, and then lastly we're going to talk briefly about tissue culture. And again, these are all forms of cloning. I think when most of us think about cloning, we directly think about making a cut. But anytime you're doing layering, you're doing dividing, tissue culture, these are all forms of cloning. And again, that definition is you're creating offspring that is genetically identical to the parent. I do want to just take a moment to remind everybody that if I take a clone off this passion flower, and I take it from Elizabeth's garden, and I bring it to my farm, and I try to grow it in a completely different climate, in completely different soil, and I give it completely different care, it can express itself completely different than it did in your garden. And this is where we discuss phenotypic expressions when it comes to genetics. This is very, very high level stuff, but basically when a plant is put in a specific environment with a certain type of culture and care, it can express itself very differently. And I've seen this time and time again from the intensity of a flower bloom and the color that I'll see in my particular environment, or my partner will take a candy kush cutting from a friend, grow it in his environment, and it expresses itself completely different. Different terpenes are expressed. Perhaps it was in a stressed environment before it came over to our garden. And so all that childhood trauma can carry over into the next generation. So just because you've taken the cutting doesn't guarantee you an identical harvest. And I think that's really important to take. All right, so the body of cloning. I did promise I'd show you this little picture of air layering. So in the upper right corner here, you'll see that long stem and then what looks like a little pouch around it. Has anybody done layering? This is really fun. And this can be a really good technique for stubborn or hard to clone plants. The last time I did this was on citrus. And basically you choose an internode. And if you'll remember from our pruning class, I'll give you a good example here. So on this little guy, that's a node, that's a node, that's a node. This is the internode, the space between two nodes. So when I'm layering, let's say this was a citrus branch, I would come right in here, right underneath this node, and I would pack that space with peat moss or cocoa fiber. And then I would make a little plastic diaper out of saran wrap, tie that off on both ends so you create a Tootsie Roll effect, hydrate that, and generally you make a little slit, and then every couple of days get in there with your spray bottle and hydrate that pocket, that diaper of cocoa fiber. And what it'll do is keep that internode moist. And if the plant is conducive to sending out advantageous roots from that area, you will be able to remove that cutting underneath the diaper and have a whole new mother plant that's rooted out. This is a really fun technique, and it's the kind of thing, again, you're doing on a live plant. So it's a really fun process to witness. Any questions on layering? It's a technique in and of itself we won't get too much into today, but if you do have questions, feel free to ask. It's really fun to play around.
Is there an advantage to that?
Well, there are a couple advantages. So let's say the clone takes a really long time to root, like it's a perennial hardwood, and you know that you're looking at, instead of 5 to 7 days to pop out roots, you're probably looking at more like 2 to 4 weeks to pop out roots. I may not want to commit to hydrating the media and spraying it 3 times a day, where I would have to do that in a cloning setup or in a dome. So here the plant has its xylem and phloem intact, and it's sending nutrients to that part of the plant. So it's kind of maintenance free, except for coming by every once in a while and just hydrating that little diaper. So I like that because it's kind of set it and forget it and then check back in a couple of weeks. Works well.
What are the plants that can do that called?
So I would say any woody perennial, you could do this to a warm season annual. You could play with it on a tomato and I guarantee you'll pop out roots within a week. But yeah, when you have a more stubborn variety that you're trying to propagate, that's when I'll go with layering or in a greenhouse.
You virtually work on all plants?
Let's test that theory. I haven't. But if the plant is conducive and we take the material from the right place at the right time and you give it the right hormones, I bet we can make it happen. Yeah, definitely. And so I wanted to show you guys this macro picture here right now because this is the close-up of the clones that we would be taking on cannabis. So again, we all know the fan leaves. We're familiar with the terminal shoot or apical growth. That's the topmost shoot. That's an auxiliary shoot, which is coming out below the apical. And then we have the node, again, that spacing in between each leaf set is the node. Pardon me?
remove that top stack.
Oh yes, thanks for asking.
Super, perfect.
There we go. You're so welcome. Thanks for saying so. And then at the very bottom, you see the trimmed nodes. So basically, we've come in with our pruners or our scalpel and we've cleaned that up. We don't want that to sit in our plug or it will rot. So that's just a maintenance step right there. And then the main stem at the very bottom, there will be a node right above that 45-degree cut. And the reason we make that cut below the node is that node is packed with what's called auxin hormones. And those hormones are what tell the plant what to do next. Whether it's to create more apical growth and grow north, or if it is to stop growing vegetatively and create a new root system because the plant has been severed from its mother. So this hormone pocket is always stored at that node. So if you cut above the node, you've just removed it. And I do want to touch on this from our pruning class as well, because cloning cuts are the exact opposite of a pruning cut. So do you guys remember where you make the cut on a pruning cut? Let's say we're going to top this cleome right here. Where would I make the cut? Can you point it out for us?
There.
Yep. Exactly, above the node, because I don't want to leave a stump. That stump will rot if it's exposed to moisture and bacterial contaminants. So again, on the pruning cut, it's always above the node. You may even discard what you just cut, so you don't need that pocket of auxins. Now on a cloning cut, that's crucial. Without that, you're depending on the plant to figure it out on its own. And we are caretakers, we are stewards of this plant's life, so we need to make sure we're giving it the right information. So exactly. Now, I did mention in our pruning class that when I am topping and cloning in the same week, I will save this material and I will start with a pruning cut above the node. And then I will picture where I want my clone site to be, and then I'll make another cut underneath the node. And we'll go through that process here in a minute to actually put it in the plug. Any questions on where to make the cut as far as the nodes and internodes go? Okay. And the other thing we want to make, oh, go ahead.
I've heard sometimes it's good to get two of the nodes, or is it?
Absolutely, yeah. Depending on the plant and depending on how much time I have to clone it, a lot of times bigger clones are hardier clones. And so if I was looking at this, pretend it's not flowering here, but I have a lot of potential node sites right here. I have a leaf set here, I have a leaf set here, I have a leaf set here. So I'm looking at this node or this node as potential cut sites for my clone. Now since this is a really nice succulent plant and there's a lot of moisture in it, I'm probably going to go for a big clone. And what I would do is I'm going to make that node my new rooting site right there. So the cut will be a pruning cut and I'll make it right here. So I'll go over that real quick. We're going to do this a bunch of times. I'll show you guys tools here in a minute too, but the scalpel is my best friend. They are surgical, they are sterile, and they're really easy to use. You'll get a number of uses out of them before they start to go dull. A few courageous souls out there actually sharpen the blade. I'm one of them. Feel free to do it. It'll extend the life. And these retail for about $2. You each have one of these in your goodie bag today. And then it's really important when we're doing cloning, don't worry, this is just water, but for demonstration purposes, hydrogen peroxide, bleach, rubbing alcohol, whatever you have under the sink, and always give that a little spray between each cut. Very important. So just to demonstrate that spot here.
Between each cut on one particular plant or one particular species of plant?
Great question. So generally between plants. So when I move from this plant to the next plant, but if there was powdery mildew present on this plant, between every single cut, because I can spread pathogens from the same plant to different parts of the same plant. So when there's a problem present, every cut. If there is no problem present and you're just trying to be proactive, a lot of alliteration there, then just go ahead and clean between plants.
Okay.
That's a very safe way to go. Yeah, nice. So on this little guy, probably, would you mind holding that for me?
Sure.
Thank you so much. So again, these are my potential sites right there. Now, who remembers what my budget is for pruning from last month's class?
30%.
30%. So I have to take that into consideration too, because if I remove 50% of certain plants, I will send them into shock. And it'll take a really long time for them to pull out of it. Now most of them will. I tested this theory on a pepper. I cut it all the way to the lowest node and left a 2-inch stub in a 5-gallon pot. It took 4 weeks to come back. But I got vegetative growth, it bounced back, and it made fruit. So again, it depends on how much time you have for a lot of these steps. All right, so I've decided to keep more in line with that 30% rule, I'm gonna make my pruning cut here, and this is gonna be my cloning cut. It's really important to cut away from yourself at that 45-degree angle, so this is the sharp edge right here, and I'm gonna move up like this. So we'll make that, and I've got a little tiny auxiliary shoot coming out right here. I'm gonna try really hard not to cut into that, so I actually might change the direction of my blade, lift that ever so slightly, so I don't cut into the new growth. Now I'll come here, and then just make a little cut just like that. Now, thank you, Robert Lee. This is my clone, and I'm gonna remove the laterals I don't need. So I'm just gonna cut away from myself like that, cut away from myself like that. Now I have the 2 nodes, 2 leaf sets, and I'm ready to dip this into my clone gel. We're gonna do this a bunch of times today, but I just wanted to show you guys the location and how you determine where you make that cut. And this is a little complicated the way I'm explaining it. Most people will teach pruning or cloning. I'm teaching both in one step because to me it's really important. This is really viable material, that apical growth at the top of my plant. I don't want to just compost that if I need new genetics. So you can both top, prune, maintain the plant's circulation and structure, and clone in one step. So I love teaching that. All right. So a couple different tools. We talked about our scalpels. These are, again, my preferred. You can also use little razor blades. We sell 5-packs here. Some people prefer the way they fit in their hand. I do always remind people that they come oiled from the factory, and that oil will suffocate the xylem and phloem when you make your cut. So again, peroxide, clean rag, make sure you have good tools handy. And when I was making those cuts, I should have had a glove on, because I don't want to spread pathogens from plant to plant. And if I'm touching my tools and touching dirty old trays and then I come to make the cut, it's very likely that I will spread a pathogen. And if the environment is conducive, it'll anchor and take hold. So gloves are a really important step as well. Have that bottle of peroxide, have a spray bottle handy with kelp water or vitamin B. They will be going through stress. I mean, you've literally just beheaded them and you're asking them to reincarnate. So make sure you have a lot of nutritive tonics on hand throughout this process.
What is the topping?
So topping, we discussed a little bit last month in pruning. So if I want to change the growth habit of this plant, because I've got a leader here, a central leader is what you're talking about, and I would like a more branch structure. Let's say I'm indoors and I have a ceiling height restriction. Anytime I come through and top most plants, it will fork, and I will get 2 auxiliary shoots where there was once 1. And I can start training this plant throughout its vegetative phase to create a nice branch-like structure. So basically it's growth habit, and it's a way to manipulate it. So you want to top, you don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the plant in this session, and you would remove it right above the nose. And then in about 5 to 7 days on this plant, I would get 2 axial shoots here. And then those would create a more lateral, more branched structure. Because if this was a cannabis plant indoors and it was only 3 or 4 weeks old, by the time it finished flower, it'd be growing into my ceiling. So it's really important that you are caretaking the growth habit of the plants as well to manage it indoors. Outdoors, the sky's the limit, go crazy.
So if you're using something like risotonic,
Yeah.
do you recommend still using kelp in addition, or is that?
There's going to be parallels on both products, but I do love kelp, especially when it comes time to soaking cuttings. And actually, I'll talk about that real briefly. So one thing I like to do is I'll come through the night before and I'll make all my pruning cuts. So all my mother plants will get topped, in effect. And then I'll clean up that lower lateral, just like I did on the first cutting. And clean up anything that's in my way. And then I'll put them in a jug for about 6 to 8 hours. What I used for this one is Zeus juice. Oh, am I spraying you there? These can be a little messy to use too. So this has been soaking for just a couple of hours, and what I was hoping to show you guys is how the xylem is sucking up the nutrient solution like a straw. So this is kelp and humic acid in our Zeus juice product from Nectar for the Gods. And so in just an hour, you can tell it's already slurping up all that good humic acid. And so it's very important to prepare your plants before you take the final cut. One place people make a lot of mistakes is they'll come out and they'll take cuttings when the plant is dehydrated. It's very important to make sure you're watering up to 48 hours before you take cuttings so that plant is rigid and full of moisture. Because if I'm battling dehydration out the gate, I'm gonna have wilty plants that I'm gonna have to limp along for the entire process. So making sure they're fully hydrated. I wanted to show you guys, actually, I'll pass this around too if you like, just to see how good it is at nutrient uptake there. So I found myself at the urban farm, because you've probably heard me talk about that quite a bit. And it was about 7 o'clock at night, they hadn't watered the farm, everything was dry, but I found a white mulberry bush. And I've been looking for white mulberry for many, many years. And so despite my better knowledge, I went ahead and took cuttings off a plant that was dehydrated. They are now going on 3 weeks. So again, this is a woody perennial. It's gonna take a lot longer to clone, I have to baby it along. But I do wanna pass this around because a couple weeks later, I've got little baby roots shooting out. So this is really exciting. Other things you can do to prepare the plant would include loading it with phosphorus the week before you take the cutting. So phosphorus is mobile in plant tissue, but not as mobile as a nutrient like nitrogen. So it's really important to pre-charge the plant with phosphorus. And you can use kelp extracts, are very high in phosphorus and potassium. You can use products like Gaia Mania or Herculean Harvest, our liquid bone meal, pure calcium phosphate, and it's pre-digested. So the plant doesn't need a microbe to break it down first to make it available. So you could feed it yesterday and we could clone today, in theory. But again, phosphorus and hydration is really important before you take the cuttings, or you're gonna end up with really wilty plants.
This is Gaia, Earth, and what else?
You could use our Bigfoot is another kelp, and Zeus juice is another kelp. I actually have our Bigfoot product running in the cloner right now.
This is great.
This is really awesome. So it's kelp, vitamin, B vitamins, and then it's naphthalene acetic acid, NAAs for short. And this is a really powerful growth hormone, very much like salicylic acid or indole butyric acid. These are compounds that are both naturally occurring and synthesized to help develop stronger root systems. This is what I run in all my cloners, and I soak all my plugs in. And I also like to soak it in any cuttings I'm going to do before I make my final cut as well. Because it has a hormone in it, it's important not to overuse it. There's an instruction on the back here, don't use it more than 5 times. The same thing goes for your liquid cloning solutions or cloning gels. A little is a lot, and people tend to overdo it. And if you send too much information, you'll confuse the plant. So again, just keep it real light. Any questions on that? All right. So I wanted to show you just a few more tools. So the humidity dome setup, if you're making cuttings and you're not using a machine, this is essential. There's a lot of different variations on this. You can get 50 cell insert trays, 72 cell insert trays, 98 cell insert trays. So really however many you want to propagate at one time. And the domes are great because what they're doing is trapping humidity. You want to keep that humidity from about 60 to 90% that first week that you're cloning until they start to create their own root system. They can't suck up water. And they have dials, so you can adjust the amount of humidity that comes through. And what I'll usually do, if I've taken a fresh round of cuttings here, depending on how humid my environment is, bathrooms work really well for this because they usually maintain about 50% humidity. But I'll come through here, just give it a nice little spray. I want to see condensation on the dome. You don't want it to be dripping or you'll create a rot scenario potentially. But this is a really good way to maintain that humidity. And in the winter months, you may need a heat mat. Now these can work for you or against you. So they non-discriminately raise temperatures anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees above room temperature. So if you're in a bathroom and it's nice and humid and it's, say, 68 degrees, and then you spike it 20 degrees to 88, you're going to kill everything in that dome. So temperature is everything. I really encourage people, if you're going to use a heat mat, buy a thermostat. It's a little bit of a hit because the thermostat costs more than the heat mat itself, but it does a great job. It's rated for 1,000 watts, so you can use it on other appliances as well, so you're not cloning year-round. It's a great way to increase soil temperature. Now when you rip this out of the box, what you'll see is there's a coil that snakes across the surface, and it's electricity that's generating heat that's keeping that mat warm, right? Well, you'll find that your plugs dry out in a snake pattern. And so it's really important to diffuse that heat evenly. So what I've done is laid a piece of terry cloth on top of my heat mat and then set the tray on top of that. Every once in a while, if you catch them at the dollar store, they sell these dollar bamboo placemats that are brilliant for diffusing heat, and they're also antimicrobial, being bamboo. So that's what I use at home to diffuse the heat. Again, these can really work for you, or they can devastate you. Most folks this time of year do not need a heat mat, but in the winter months, it can be very useful.
You're not offering me.
What is the
Yeah, record.
temperature
Yeah,
for?
unhappy store. Yeah, I'm unhappy.
If you can do 70 to 75, that's my sweet spot. They'll still take at about 68, 69, it'll take a little longer. If you get much past 76, 78, you are potentially breeding bad bacteria that really thrive in those warmer temperatures. So 70 to 76 is prime. If you go a little above that or a little below that, you're still going to make it. Perfect. Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited about this.
Florence at the door.
Great question. Yeah, you can pretty much model that off soil temperatures, so 68 to 75 would be good. Make sure you trust your thermometer though. Many have very big variances, like 5 to 7 degrees off. So there are these laser thermometers that you can buy for around $35. We stock them here. You can point them at your water, your compost tea, your soil, a leaf surface to see if it's too hot to spray. And it's very accurate within a point. Yeah, but water temperatures are huge, and I will take that opportunity, thank you, to discuss the pitfalls of these cloning machines. So this time of year, a lot of people come in saying, my cloning machine's not working. So what's going on is heat. So that pump, electricity, is warming up the reservoir, generally out of that safe range. So if you've got hot water, you're gonna have rot. So it's a really important thing to remediate or keep an eye on. One of my favorite tricks is to buy an $11 timer, 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off, 15 on, 15 off. If you're in a very humid environment, you may even be able to go 15 on, half an hour off, 15 on, half an hour off. And I've seen quicker rooting time out of this technique because roots need to reach to develop. And they're not gonna reach to that which is sitting in abundance right next to them. So this makes it almost too easy for them. So I like to use the timer to give them a little bit of a drying out time. But in the cloning phase, the medium should always be evenly moist. It's not like your grown-up plants where you want them to dry out between waterings. It's critical that they're evenly moist but not soft. So the timer can save you. The other thing folks will do is they'll just freeze half-liter bottles and float them in the reservoirs. It works, but it's not a science. You really have to keep an eye on how quick those heat up. But that can help remediate temperatures as well. The largest unit we sell is, I believe, a 128 site cloner. And I've only had one person in 10 years be happy with their purchase because that pump is so hot that even in 60-degree weather, it's creating way too much. So a lot of those more commercial style producers will buy the $400 water chiller just to keep that unit operating. But like you said earlier, it is a machine and it pumps out clones, so it does a really good job. And we sell a 7-site clone here for $60, which is really nice. A lot of these machines are upwards of $200 to $400. They're really sturdy. They generally don't break. These are four manifolds are very, very sturdy. So this is the design that we've gone with over the years. If you want to save a little money, the 7-site cloner is perfect. And you can double up on the clone sites. Just stick 2 cuttings in one neoprene insert. And this is what sorry Kevin, this is what I'm talking about on the neoprene insert. So this is just a plastic synthetic material that can be used over and over again. You definitely want to sterilize your machines. I meet these customers that 4 rounds of clones later, they're still getting rot. And it's a matter of a pathogen being in the system that they haven't cleaned out. Bleach does do a great job. There's a couple other harsher chemicals on the market. I have great luck with peroxide, and I use beneficial microbes to prevent rot out the gate. So it's not a big deal.
Using food grade?
Food grade peroxide? It's actually a technical grade for the ag industry, but yeah, the food grade would be fine too. Yeah. Any questions on the easy cloners? When they work, they really work, and when they don't, they really don't.
What is the water solution, or you can cover that later?
No thanks, this is a fine time. So right now I'm running the Bigfoot. This is one of the nectar products that is stable in a reservoir. There's a couple that aren't, but most of the additives can be used in a circulating reservoir, and they won't go around anaerobic on you within a week. So that's a great way to go.
How much did you put in there?
A teaspoon per gallon. Yep. Kaolin is kind of an oldie but goodie. Chris, have you used this one before in your many adventures? This one is indole butyric acids, and most cloning solutions, whether liquid or gel, have the same active ingredient. Now, if you do find one you like, stick with it. It's probably manifestation of your projection, so keep using the product that you like. But this compares very much to any of the other liquids on my shelf. Again, it's the IBA acids that are triggering root development. But this works great in cloners and it's very cheap, so people like this one. Now this is a fun one too. Do you guys remember the Azos samples you got a couple months ago, I think in our compost tea brewing class? Has anyone played with those in a cloning scenario yet? All right, so that is what popped roots out of my mulberry. So we have another cloner set up in the corner here if you want to check that out at the end. And we put Azos in that cloner. Does anyone know what Azos is? What type of microbe it is? It's a bacteria. It's a nitrogen fixing bacteria. Now this is not the fixer that will fix nitrogen for your legumes. That's a very different species called Rhizobia. But this works with a lot of other warm season annuals like cannabis and potatoes and tomatoes. And it's literally fixing atmospheric nitrogen, pulling it out of the air, and turning it into a plant usable form stored in the earth for the plant to take advantage of at its convenience. So it's a really great way to boost nitrogen levels. Now what do we know about nitrogen in the cloning phase? Does it have any place there? No. We're not trying to promote leafy green growth. We're trying to develop a very strong root system that can then support vigorous leafy green growth down the road. So what's really interesting about the Azos bacteria is it stimulates indole butyric acid production in the plant. It does not create it in and of itself, but it tells the plant to make it. So this works phenomenally well on stubborn, shrubby perennials that you really want to propagate. So if you do have your sample at home, play with that in the cloning scenario. You can take all of your plugs and you can create a solution in a bowl and then just soak these in that material. And what I like to do with the plugs is I'll put them in my tub for about 20 minutes, let them suck up as much water as they can. So right now it's sopping wet. What I'm going to do is squeeze it like this, just until it stops running off. That's perfect moisture content right there, folks. You don't want them to be dripping wet, and you don't want to wring them dry, because I want this to stay moist for at least 3 to 5 days so that I can go to the river and do other things while they're taking anchor. So these work really well. I wanted to show you the different plugs that we sell. So you can tell very different sizes here. This one is made by Sun Leaves. This one is made by GH. So the height is a big difference. Now some people like the taller plugs because when you pop that in your 50 cell insert, I can grab it. With these, you need like a fork or a knife, and you can kind of pinch from the bottom and push up, but it's a little harder. I will say though that they fit very well in the 50 cell insert tray, and I'll show you the difference here. So that one's going to be really hard to get out. This one with that little thumb grip right there, I can grab it and pull it right out. And the other difference between these two is this is denser. It's a composted tree bark is what they make these out of. This one is much airier, so I can tell right off the gate this is going to dry out faster, and I'm going to have to keep an eye on that. Any questions on the plugs?
Is the composted tree bark acidic as well, or all the plugs?
It's been neutralized.
Okay.
Thanks for asking, because not all media is pH balanced. Perfect segue. Has anybody worked with Grodan? Yeah? Did you have good luck with it in your cloning lines?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Now what do you have to do to it before you use it?
I soaked it in 50-50 solution. I used growth hormones when I cloned it. I put it in a cloner with a cup of water that's aerated. And I keep it bubbling and I keep it closed for about a week.
Oh, perfect.
And the humidity stays up. I don't cut the leaves because I don't have to.
Right.
I don't stress the plant at all. It's just a cut and then right into the sun solution and then into this. And I take it and squeeze one solution into the hole.
Perfect,
So
yeah.
that, you know what I mean?
So everyone
And
can
then
see
anywhere from
pre-snap beginners.
anywhere
Yeah.
from 5 to 14 days,
Uh-huh.
they all just start to group for 3 or 4 days, and then they're all done, and then they come out, and I just go away. You know, I saw online some women had figured it out, and 19, 25 5 or something like that. Not very many ants on it, you know. But
Sure.
it works great for like up to 12 clones. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't have to squeeze the leaves together, and it's a sure thing.
I like it when people space.
Which is fine.
So rather than filling every single cell here, you can checkerboard it, or you can remove the squares, because these are all breakaway perforated tabs, and then just, we do have square inserts too that fit these, and then checkerboard it. That way you don't have that leaf overlap that creates
Yeah,
mold.
and you can buy those that are wrapped individually, and you can put a whole mat in, or you can take them off individually so they're wrapped and they don't dehydrate inside. And
Definitely.
yeah, really.
I like it. Grodan is very user-friendly and it's very forgiving. The one thing though, like you mentioned, is you do have to pre-treat it. So Grodan is spun volcanic rock. Yep. So it is very alkaline and it's out of the safe pH range for plants. Again, we want to be operating in that 6 to 7 range when we're dealing with soil. So it's way too high. So you have to pH adjust it down before you use it. And Grodan gives you a little example of how to use a lemon. Squeeze it, adjust to 5.5, and then after a few washings and waterings, it'll flush a lot of the limestone out, and you'll be back to a neutral zone. But no, not all medium starts out neutral. That's really important. The other one that's really forgiving is Oasis. Has anyone worked with this material? Pam, did you have good luck with it?
I like it. It's a little probably a little more delicate, a little more fragile, but if you just do one cut, you can get it close.
Yeah, perfect. They're very crumbly.
Learning curve.
Yes.
But it is very effective and a little forgiving, wholesome moisture.
I found that too. I noticed I didn't have to rehydrate for a good 6 to 7 days.
Exactly, and you're kind of
Yeah.
worried, but
Yeah.
you're like, no. And I just took a little piece of paper because it's hard to tell the wet and dry.
Right.
Maybe just put a little piece of paper on it.
Oh, that's a great way to do it, to see if it absorbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like the chopstick trick from the
Right,
art of
yes.
watering, yeah. I'll pass this around in case, it sounds like some folks haven't seen this before. What it reminds me of is floral foam, when folks make the floral arrangements, and it falls apart and crumbles just like that. Now, I've never had a rep give me a clear answer on what this is made out of, and that's my only hesitation, right? Nobody can tell me.
I like that. It's good. We'll get back to you, but no breakfast.
No, nothing. Yeah. I'll send these plugs around too, just to give everybody a few options. And then one last medium I wanted to cover, good old Jiffy pellet. You guys worked with these? Little expandable
Little pot.
pet pots. Yes. Now what I don't love about peat is it's hydrophobic. Some of you will remember that from our soil class. It's actually repelling water. So you'll see water puddle up and just pool. It takes a really long time for it to absorb. You can use wetting agents like soap or yucca, and that will help speed up and break that surface tension barrier. But they're cheap, they're 10 cents each, and they do a really good job. Very portable, easy to pop out and transplant, just right into the ground like Pam said. So I'll go ahead and send that one around too.
Heat pellets?
I recommend it for tomatoes and veggies, not chemicals.
There we go. Beautiful. And then one other thing. Now some folks do propagate in pumice and perlite, just pure pumice and perlite. Other folks will use a soilless mix where it's 50% cocoa fiber, 50% pumice and perlite. Pros and cons. I love cocoa fiber. It has a great water retention. The pumice and perlite ensure good drainage and really good aeration. It creates micro habitats for microbes to start creating colonies on. So I'll pass this around too. There's lots of options. I say try 2 or 3, see what works for you, and then stick with what works. That's the pumice. Now the perlite, it crushes really easy. Now the pumice, I dare someone to try to pop that like a popcorn, you can't. So over time, the perlite, under its own weight, will start to get finer and finer and finer as it kind of grinds itself down, where pumice holds its shape better year to year. So I'm a big fan of pumice. It weighs a lot more than perlite, so do take note of that if you're adding a certain percentage to your containers with that. A lot of extra weight to move around.
So if you use pumice, you wouldn't need perlite.
You could do the blend. Yeah, you could definitely do the blend. Vermiculite kind of left the market about 3-4 years ago. There was a big asbestos contamination scare. I have seen Black Gold re-release vermiculite products with asbestos-free marketing now. So if you can find that, absolutely. The thing to note about vermiculite is it holds a lot of water. where perlite and pumice drain it and shed it, vermiculite is actually very absorbent. So I like your idea of the mix.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that 75-25?
That sounds pretty good to me. Yeah. I fear rot could potentially happen. People do though. It's a matter of what you have on hand, and if you know your medium and you can preconceive what problems may go wrong, and then you just have to monitor your moisture levels a little bit more. Yeah. So segueing, another technique I wanted to talk about real quickly, to tip or not to tip. So this came up in our pruning class because there's a lot of semantical confusion in the gardening world, and it's oftentimes very regionally specific. So we were talking about how tipping and topping can sometimes be used interchangeably. There's another definition for tipping, which is basically removing, and I'm going to use cleome because it has that palmately compound leaf, just like cannabis. Have you guys met cleome before? I'm going to send one around. It is the skunkiest flower I have ever smelled. It's also known as spider flower because it creates these beautiful explosions of spider-like blooms. So back to tipping. Basically what I would do is after I've taken the cutting or before, I'm going to come through here and literally just tip the tops of the fan leaf. Now what I've done is reduce the surface area of the leaf overall so that it does not transpire or lose water as fast. So the goal is this will help prevent wilt. The other thing I just did was took a third of my solar panels off, and I need that little guy to photosynthesize so it can make carbon for itself so it can create a root system. So it's kind of 6-to-1, half a dozen the other, because you're cutting down on solar panel surface area, but you're also cutting down on evaporation and transpiration. I asked a master gardener up in Portland what their preference or recommendation is, and they said 6-to-1, half a dozen the other. It's an extra step. I like to save time, so I don't tip. The other thing it can help prevent, though, in the cloning dome is the whole overlapping leaf syndrome. If I've got water and condensation collecting between those leaves and powdery mildew spores are present, and my bathroom is very cold, again, cold plus wet generally equals powdery mildew in our valley, that's a cross-contamination risk right there. So again, checkerboarding the clones so that they have room to breathe and stretch out, or coming through and tipping. Come over here for this side of the room. Again, I just came right through. I'm removing about 25 to 30% of the tip of the leaf so it can still do its job. Just like that. Tipping, to tip or not to tip, I leave it up to you. Definitely pros and cons. When you see commercial production gardens, they always tip. And again, that's just to prevent that crossing leaf issue. Questions on that? All right. The other question I posed to you today is to soak or not to soak. I'm a soaker, and I like to do jobs in phases, so this just works well for my routine. But I'll come through in the morning after I've watered the day before, after I've loaded it up on phosphorus for a week, and I'll take those cuttings early morning before it's exposed to the heat of the day. And then I'll put them in a tub of Zeus juice or Bigfoot, something with kelp, something with humic acids, and I'll let them suck that up for about 6 hours. Then, and they're in a climate-controlled environment during that time, I may come through once or twice and just give them a nice light mist to keep that canopy wet. And then from there, again, just like a straw, they've sucked up that humic acid. And so now I've made sure they're fully loaded before I take their feet off. So that's a really good technique. And again, when you do the soaking, you make that pruning cut first in one step. You're soaking for 6 hours, and then you come through and you make your final cut. So you guys ready to make some cuts? Y'all want to grab your goodie bags. I just want to do a few together. So look to your left, look to your right. You're going to see grapes, cherries. You're going to see honeysuckle. I brought in my thornless blackberries so nobody will get poked. And if you want to grab your scalpel, leave your cloning gel in the bag. I don't want anyone to contaminate their cloning gel during class. So it is sealed. It is a tamper-proof package on top. And it's very important, anytime you're using your gel to preserve the quality of it, that you spoon it into another receptacle. Don't dip in your tub. It's very important. If there's a pathogen, you'll spread it. I've seen a lot of mold growing in these units in our shop use cloners over the years, and I know my coworkers are just dipping cuttings right into it. So this is Life Gel, and the reason I really like it is because it has thyme oil, and that's very unique. When I was saying all cloning gels are created the same, there's subtle differences. One thing I noticed with this, it's not quite as thick of a gel as something like Clonex. Now Clonex is very, very popular. It's probably the most recognized name in the market for cloning. It's purple, and it is very thick. The thicker the gel, the more likely it is to stay where you put it. And then when you come behind it to rehydrate it, you're not going to wash it all off. And that's why I like the gels, because they stay. Where with the liquids, unless you're doing a soap, sometimes those can dissipate or be washed out of the system really quickly. So I do like the gels, but I love that this has the thyme oil in it. Can anyone guess what thyme oil's purpose is? Yep, I heard antifungal, antibacterial, exactly. So it's just a built-in pathogen protector. So what I would do here is spoon or pour some of my gel in there, and you guys can see how jelly it is. It's very nice and thick. And you should be wearing gloves. Again, this is a concentrated hormone. I don't think I need any of those transdermally applied through my skin. And you might want to have a spoon or a knife or something handy just to keep it at reach there. And then we've all got our scalpels. So again, we all signed waivers. Be very careful of your neighbors. Before we make a cut, does anybody have a question on that 45-degree angle?
Speak up. Yeah.
Nope? Okay.
Yeah, he did.
All right. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and make a few cuts with you guys, and then I'll invite you to take your cuttings as well. So I'm going to just start with a grape. So again, I've made pruning cuts at home. And so what I want to do is visualize what is my clone going to look like. And again, like Evan said, you're going to want several lateral sets of leaves. A little more plant morphology for you guys. This is an arrangement, a leaf arrangement that is opposite. So this leaf is opposite from this leaf is opposite from this leaf. The other arrangement we often see in plants is, this is alternating, forgive me. We see opposite, where there'll be another leaf coming right out here from the same node. So that's an opposite arrangement. This is an alternating arrangement. Start looking at your cannabis plants and your flowers and your food out in the garden. It was really interesting to me to note that cannabis can be either opposite or alternate. Take a peek at that. Okay, so I've got, let's call that 1, let's call that 2. I'm going to even leave 3 here because this is a very succulent vine and I know it'll handle a larger cutting. So this is going to be my new root zone right here. So I have a little bit of cleanup to do. The first thing I'm going to do, cutting away from myself, and even when you're pruning, 45-degree cuts, right? So I'm going to cut away from myself, just remove that. Now I don't need that, I don't need that, this is all in my way. Now I've got my node side right here. Now I'm going to jump one down real quick and show you guys how not to do it. So if you have dull pruners or you're still figuring out that 45-degree cut, one of the most common mistakes people make is they'll cut into the cambium and they'll keep going and they'll go like that. So I just created probably a 80-degree angle cut right there. So I've opened up a lot of surface area. That's nice because it will take up water everywhere there is open surface area. But I've left this stringy cambium layer on the bottom. This might rot. It's not a good cut. I want a nice tight 3 millimeters below the node, 45-degree angles. If you have a really weak hand, sometimes you'll end up doing that kind of a thing and you'll miss the node completely. So what I want to do is come to that node, hold it away from me, 45-degree angle, and blink, just like that. It's all on the wrist. So lots of practice. At this point, I'm going to come to my jar of hormone, and I'm going to dip it very lightly in here. Just the node. I don't need to go up the stem. And then the other thing I do that often surprises people is I'll take my little cloth or a piece of wax paper, and I'll very just gently roll it in at one time. I don't need a ton of hormone, and this will be for my next cutting. And then I'm going to take my plug. Now, a lot of people will just jam the stem in the plug. That's what most of us do when we're first starting. Now, my teacher taught me a trick where you fillet open the plug. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to make, let's say, about a 50% cut.
right about there. Fillet it open like a hot dog bun. Lay the cutting in the bowl, just like that. Snug the collar up around the stem and put it in my insert tray. It's that easy. But I really encourage with any media, even the Jiffy Peat pellets, which I think are still circulating, they do give you a preset hole. On Grodan, they give you a preset hole, but it's like maybe a quarter of an inch, perfect for a seed. But I do like to take a pencil or a clean chopstick and preset those holes. Because what do you think happens if I just jam this right down the side of the medium? Yeah, I just displaced it. Now it's up here, and I want it at the cut. So very important to fillet open. And then you'll notice too on these plug inserts.
Yes, so your gel would be when you cut it.
Yep,
So it's not sliding, not being slided up the stem.
exactly. Yep, keep it where you want it on that node site. Now what you will notice on these guys, if you go for a 50 cell insert tray, it's going to be a little wobbly, right? So I might want to go with that larger plug that I showed you, the one that sits up a little higher, or get a 72 cell insert tray. It'll fit real snug in a 72. Pros and cons. So I've got a huge air pocket around this plug. It's going to dry out a lot faster with all that air right there. Now if I snug it into a 72 cell insert tray, when I come to lift it, I'm going to disturb the roots. Pros and cons in all things. It can be a trade-off, so I invite you to make your own decisions. Personally, I like that they dry out a little bit faster because I can load them with kelp, I can load them with Diamania, and I get a quicker rooting time. And I can remove them quicker, and you really want to be mindful to not disturb those fragile root hairs. Those are feeders, and they are critical when the plant is at that young stage to help it grow.
I want to trick we did this for
So it had like a little blanket that, a nest. I love that. That's a great idea. And with cocoa fiber being such a great water retainer, I think that's a great way to
How
go.
long are they supposed to be in the tray?
So it depends on the genetics. Generally, I'd say 3 to 7 days. I've seen them pop in 3, I've seen them pop in 5, I've seen them pop in 14. There are some strains that are more vigorous than others, and those will definitely pop faster.
And all you need is just little nuts.
Yes.
Because I mean, when I first started doing it, I'd pull it up, there's a tail this long. And you can-
Sure. Yeah, no, you gotta kind of size it up there. All right, so I'd love for everybody to make a couple cuts. Oh, question, Chris?
Did you say you're using Bigfoot as your kelp supplement?
Yep, and I only use that in the cloner and then on first transplant. Because at that point, I've done probably 2 reservoir changes and I've watered it in another 2 times. So,
Fully mixing with kelp?
absolutely. They'd love it. Yeah. You could use Thrive Alive, you could use MaxiCrop, you could use Poseidonzyme from Nectar. Yeah, they're all great kelp additives. Perfect. All right, everybody. So picture the future clone on the cutting in your hand. And again, count from the tip. So remember, pardon? Oh, you need one. You need plant material. Do we have any more plant material? Oh, could we pass that one up front? Thank you so much. All right. So again, picture,
I passed it.
find where the tip is, and that tip again is called the apical meristem. That is where plants grow north. So that's where rapid cell division is occurring. It is possible, and I've seen people clone raspberries upside down, stick them in the ground the reverse way, because they're so just prolific. They will pop roots from anywhere you want, but that upside down trunk will die. So you have to prune that off once you get new growth. So again, apical tip goes north. So once you've got your 1, 2, 3 leaf sets, start eyeing where on the plant you need to start removing leaves that are excessive and where you want that node site to be. And in every workstation, you will see plugs. Everybody will get a little plug to work with. You may, if you feel comfortable, use your scalpel to fillet open. If you don't, please ask for pruners. I do have a few sets on here. And then again, be very mindful of your partners. When you feel like you've located the right spot, 45-degree angle, cut away from you. If anybody wants to help, let me know.
These get cut off too.
Yes, because they will not serve a purpose during the cloning phase, so they're just accessory. Yes, and actually, thanks for saying that. I cut the material long enough that we may be able to get 2 clones out of some of these vines. Absolutely.
You can mess that up. I got a better question. Again, what? I got a better question.
I agree. It's so close to the ground that it. Perfect. Yes.
Does the north have to actively be leafed in order to count in regards to that?
Great question. So this will end up becoming a new leaf. This will become a new leaf. This is going to die. That's going to die.
Right.
So because you have a section this big and you have your 1, 2, 3 nodes, I would probably clean that up, and then that potentially be your site. This could be your site too because you have 2 nodes. But once you clean this off, you'll have no solar panels to photosynthesize.
Right.
And you need to leave at least 2 or 3.
Okay.
When you have a multi-tip there on the top, do you just leave all that, or?
You may, yeah. It'll push through that. You could also clean it up, but again, the solar panels are important at this phase.
So just go down 3 and.
Yeah, that should be perfect. Yeah.
We're confused on
And this just looks different too.
Right,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
It's way different.
So again, all of these are going to be nodes, and now we're at the opposite. So you live at a point where you want. And so let's say that's a leaf site, there's your third. Given this is a smaller structure, I would probably do it very not. And I would use that. Just underneath. Yep. So this is our tip. Yep. And then you'll chop your talking about.
So then,
You can. I like to just get them out of the way before I pop it. Yeah. Of course.
Is that a 45?
Let me see here. It's like a 49. It's, no, that's good. That's good. And then,
The node is there.
because it's got a leaf site coming off it, it'll be okay. Sometimes I'll come in and just very surgically remove just that one part.
like that?
Yep. And you can go closer to the node.
You said 3 nodes.
And this is a,
Cut below.
yep. Yep, I'd come up about a 1/4 inch. So the goal is 3 millimeters below the node. A couple millimeters below the node.
So that's too far below the nose bed.
Right. So yeah. That's perfect.
Now, if I've done it wrong, can I go ahead and do it?
You sure can. You sure can, yeah.
Is 5 millimeters too much?
Let's see. On a you're gonna be fine on a raspberry. If it was cannabis, I'd probably bring it in a little bit more like right.
I know, that's what I was trying to do it. But
Yeah, that's perfect 45. And if you wanted, you could bump that up just to about there. Now the danger, the danger is if you get too close, I just cut into that pocket. Yeah. So safe is good, but if there's too much, what you'll see is all the roots will pop out here. That stuff will die.
Very good is that.
Like if you accidentally cut into the new growth net, it'll, have you heard of thinning? Fuck, I missed. So what actually happens is it erupts that pocket of auxins, and it creates this really crazy growth pattern where you get kind of this weird mutation of the leaves because they've been hooked into. But it'll branch and fork sometimes 3 times instead of twice. Yeah. You want printers? Yeah.
is that too close?
Nope. Nope, that's perfect. Textbook cut, nice. Oh, I do have band-aids, folks, let me know. I keep these close at hand. I used to joke if they're gonna bleed, I should bleed.
It is free iron for the plants, but yeah, be mindful. Do you have a question? Can I see you?
45.
Yeah, let me tell you.
But no, but when I'm using clippers versus scissors, I get it backwards.
In an inch.
Perfect.
Female is not very
That's perfect. And you cleaned up the top beautifully.
I've got bandits. That doesn't look good.
It's like stuck in the
No, it is fortunate rather than slow.
And if you have long plant material, feel free to make a couple of cuts just to practice the 45. I'm going to check one more cutting back here.
You are coming down this is, I suppose it also
I'm like a surgeon. Nice. And that's perfect. So if you want it, you can just... That's perfect. Yeah, especially on the if it's like my white mulberry, I was almost measuring that millimeter. That's how you want to go. Absolutely. It is a edible peanut. And they are delicious. Yeah.
3 millimeters equals what in 1/16 of an inch?
Ooh.
I mean,
I would say 2/16.
so an eighth of an inch.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, 1 to 2 depending. These have measurements on them too. Oh, that's great.
What has centimeters in case you can't do the conversion?
I know, right? What is a 10th of a centimeter? English major gardener. So it was just pointed out to me there's actually a measuring scale here. So you can measure millimeters off your centimeter ruler right here if that helps. Just to put a little bit into perspective. Perfect. Yes. And those thornless blackberries are so good. And yes, yes. Great for children's gardens too because they don't get poked.
And they actually get good.
Indeed.
It would be the 3
It
millimeters.
is. Yep. It is. My friend called it Chesterberry, but I think he's making that up.
So,
No, but he's a little creative.
I've actually heard of
Yeah, so this is really vigorous. Yeah, I mean, you've got 1, 2, 3 node sites. You can tell there's a ton of auxins just pushing growth right here.
thornless.
So you could clean that up, you could make the one there, and that could be a clone. And then you can still make 2 or 3 more off the same branch. Exactly.
Now, would it be this way or
Oh, great question. So in a cloning cut, doesn't matter.
you don't want that 45 to be in the direction of
You are meticulous. I don't know biologically if it'll make a difference, but I have a very strong case of OCD, and I would appreciate that direct line cut. So feel free. Yep. Sure. I don't know that it'll make much of a difference on the rooting end, but when you're making that pruning cut on the branch you want to remove, it's really important to make your pruning cuts so that they run. So if this is my trunk and I'm removing a big side branch, I don't want to leave my cut like this because all the water's going to pool into that crotch. It's going to rot out that branch over time. So if this is my trunk and I'm removing this branch, I want my cut to be shedding water away from the main trunk. When you're doing micro pruning, not as important to keep an eye on, but if it's something you appreciate, the plant will appreciate it over time as well.
So, you're talking cleaning this up, you clean that.
Yep, cutting away from the main trunk. Beautiful. Did everybody get to make a couple cuts?
Is there any of the Chesterberry?
I bet we have a lower branch that we could, do you want to take one home? Yeah. Roberly, may we share one of the lower internodes with the gal back here?
Let me just.
At your leisure.
Erica, would you recommend not leaving it so long and maybe cutting it there instead? If that makes it pretty short.
I like right
Chop the
here.
hell out of
Yep.
yours, dude.
But honestly, again, because this is a very succulent, quickly growing cane,
It doesn't matter.
it won't matter. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, this is a perfect
Some for
example.
somebody that wanted
Oh yeah, we'll pass it back here. So yeah, just to show, this is great, you guys. I have a lateral here. I have a new auxiliary lateral popping here. I have a really strong solar panel here. Perfect 45-degree angle cut, just below the nose. Yep. That's perfect, Bradley. Nice work. Can we pass this to the lady in the back?
So somebody else wanted to,
I think we're good. Thank you.
So this node was left, how close is the cut to the stem?
Great question, especially when you're talking about perennials and trees. So there's a structure called the branch collar, and that branch collar is where the branch meets the trunk. And you guys have probably seen this when people have delimbed old oak trees. You'll see this big like crown formed, and it looks like a big donut. And that is a scar. The plant is healing and creating a lot of scarification to seal off that wound. Now if you cut into the branch collar, depending on the species, you can kill that tree. Yeah, so it's really important. I would go by that couple millimeter rule again. 2 to 3 millimeters is a really good rule. Perfect. All right. Yeah. Thank you. I almost forgot. So the question was, when do you score or cut the cambium, the stem material, on your cutting? Great question. I'm glad you brought that up. You sure can. Help yourself. Oh yeah. Okay, so the question was to score or not to score. So by scoring, we're talking about, so the rules that you've just learned, we're about to break them. So instead of that perfect 45-degree cut, scoring is for stubborn plants. So if you don't get a good rooting time and you're on 12 or 14 days and you just know it's this hybrid genetic connoisseur strain that is just really hard to grow, there's a couple tricks. All the boosters we talked about today, the indole butyric hormones, the naphthalene acetic hormones, microbes that can help promote root development, those will all help. But there's some mechanical or cultural things we can do as well. So scoring is when you just cut into the cambium around that node site to expose more to the world. So that was a little deep. So oftentimes too, I'll use my finger as a guide and just very, very carefully, I mean, I'm barely removing a fraction of a millimeter.
Is that the same as like taking the razor blade sideways and just kind of disturbing everything?
Yeah, yeah. The other thing people will do, let me get something a little woodier. Now on, every February I do something called forcing branches. So I'll go out and pick pussy willows and cherries and witch hazel, early winter bloomers, and I'll just destroy the bottom of the stem. So you can come through here and you can literally score it this way, make an X, and I'm coming about a ½ inch down. The idea is surface area, so just expose it to more surface area. If I was forcing a cherry branch, I'd take my hammer next and I'd smash the heck out of the bottom of it, and I'd put it in a 5-gallon bucket of kelp water, Zeus juice, overnight in the dark, and then generally within 1 to 3 days I get flowers. So it's so interesting what we can do to manipulate nature, and again, it's those pockets of hormones that we're manipulating, telling the plant what to do. So that's a type of scoring. Again, just to kind of show you on a more macro plant here, I'm just very gently removing the cambium layer. And you can use your thumb as a guide to
going
come
all
here.
the way around?
You can. So I've experimented with it.
So what's that do?
Yes. Yeah, just like that. Yep,
What does
absolutely.
that do?
So you're opening up more surface area of the vascular tissue so it can take up more water. So instead of just having one tiny little open door, now I have all this surface area for water.
Just for refreshing before you do.
Yeah, now I only do this on stubborn woody perennials, only. I do know some people who score their cannabis cuttings. I haven't seen it slow the process down. I haven't seen it be a complete failure, and I haven't seen it speed things up, so to each his own. But let's say you wanted to take cuttings from a mother, and you wanted to take lower branch cuttings. This is one last thing I wanted to talk about here too, was where do you take the cuttings off your plant? So if this was a big bushy cannabis plant, there's pros and cons. So what's this top called again? close. It starts with an A. Apical. Yep, apical growth, right? So on the apical growth here, this is going to have the most concentration of auxin hormones. This is the part of the plant that is growing the fastest. So these are going to be your most viable cuttings. There's also some weight.
Something like this is not a flower, it's a shoot.
So I think a caterpillar ate that top off is what happened here. I see an axial coming out, so I would just take my pruners or my thumbnail and clean that up. I'd leave that one because that'll be a leaf, and then I would just 45-degree cut that off like a pruning cut.
And then where would you do the cut?
Here's a great spot, and here's a great spot too. I would probably go lower, so you have 1, 2, 3
So you
leaves.
cut off that leaf and then do your 45 like
You got it. That's the ticket. Yeah.
But you save that little bud there.
I would not, because it will be growing at the soil line, and it will be susceptible to rot. And raspberries and blackberries are very susceptible to rot.
So you cut that and the stem and then you
Exactly. And this will probably try to grow back in a week. Just pinch it. Yeah. Again, it's about training. Okay, so there is some benefit to taking lower branches, and that benefit goes back to phosphorus. When I was discussing how phosphorus is not one of the most mobile nutrients inside plant tissue, it does tend to hang out in older growth. And so the plant will oftentimes have to reroute that towards new growth as like a reserve pocket of phosphorus. So there's a high concentration of phosphorus in older branches. And so since you need that mineral there, it's in abundance. That's the benefit. What I've noticed too though is taking older, lower branches, if it's a mom that's 3 to 6 months old, they get a little woody, right? That would be the time to spore. So if you have woody growth, that would be the time to spore. But I like to, as we discussed last month, be very efficient and make pruning, topping, and cloning cuts all in one step. And if you can time your garden maintenance plan around that schedule, it'll really speed up the process for you, and you'll have all your tools out at the right time that you need. Any questions on where to take the cut?
We're actually too late in the outdoor growing
For
process
indicas, yeah. No, there are some sativas that are in pre-flower right now. You may take those. And now I say too late in ideal world. You may absolutely take cuttings off a flowering plant. Just make sure you have a lot of time on your hands and make sure you have the right nutrition and tonics and that you can commit to carrying and nursing that clone along for maybe 2 months. So if I was doing a flowering cut, actually this is a perfect example. Thanks for bringing that up. So let's say this is cannabis. Smells like skunk number 1. So what I'm going to do here is try to save this genetic, and let's say every apical tip is starting to throw out pistils, right? So I can't choose a lower branch that is less advanced, and I need to save the genetic for next year. So what I'll do is I'll take a really nice big cutting, and I'll start cleaning up the lower branches. That'll probably be my root site right there, so I'm going to get that out of the way. I'm going to leave 1, 2, 3 leaf sets. And now I need to trick this plant back into veg. So I'm going to tell it to stop flowering. So I'm going to come through here and I'm literally going to remove the flowers, remove the pistils. If you have little calyx popping out of that, remove those. The goal is to erase the memory that I was once flowering. So I'm going to come through here and do the same, come through here and do the same. If you've ever done this on a pepper plant, peppers are auto flower. And so out the gate from the nursery, month 1, they're throwing off flowers. And I will pinch all those little tops off until it grows to 2.5, 3 feet tall. Then I'll let it flower. Again, it's all about manipulation.
Would have any single leaves do with it?
Pardon?
Any single leaves instead of like 5, just like 1?
On cannabis?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is usually a sign of poor genetic vigor. So the question was when they just shoot out the 1 leaf blade, so instead of getting a palmately compound 7 or 9 leaf blades, you just get 1 or 3. Has anyone seen that? Yeah, it's usually I'm super stressed or I have really bad bloodline. There's a lot of backyard breeding going on, and so a lot of these genetics are not stable. They may produce this incredible connoisseur quality flower that has a great medicinal value, so I don't want to dissuade anyone from cultivating it. But generally when you see that, get ready with your kelp, get ready with your humic, and you may even want to score. So again, those would be the times that would be a little more particular. But yeah,
score. So if this was a flowering plant and I knew that it was going to be in my cloner for the next month or so, there's my node. I'm going to make my second cut right underneath the node, 45 degrees, and then I might even come through here. And I like that scraping technique you talked about. That actually works really nice because you want to just barely cut into the cambium layer without disturbing anything else. So now I have more surface area for that hormone to be uptaken. Cool. So I just erased flower memory, and yes, you can secure next year's genetics right now, even on a flowering plant. They're kind of neat to watch re-veg too, because you'll have these weird flower sites, and then you'll get this explosion of leaves at the top. It's an interesting process. Any questions on that?
Yeah, on the nose that are gonna go on the ground,
Uh-huh.
is there any advantage to pinching them?
Pinching. What do you mean?
Messing up the end of them?
Kind of like I did when I smashed my branches.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, on a hardwood, potentially. On grapes, on canes, not necessarily. I would try the less aggressive approach first, and if it's stubborn, go at it. Grab the hammer.
Can't fix it with an hammer, get a bigger hammer.
That's right, that's right. So we've been talking a lot about apical meristematic growth today, and I just wanted to end with basal meristematic growth as a contrast. So true or false, I can take a cutting of this carrot and it'll turn into a new plant. True or false?
True.
I heard false, false.
I think you have to take part of the arm, yeah.
Yes, thank you, yes.
Underneath the, like, here, right?
Yep, you got it. So carrots, onions, these are basal meristematic, and not basil like the herb, but B-A-S-A-L. This is not on your handout, I'm just throwing it out of the market, but basal meristematic growth is very interesting. So generally with plant, I kept talking about apical growth growing north, right? It's kind of like our hair versus our fingernails, if you think about it. Yeah, lettuce is another example. So lettuce doesn't create a leaf, and then create a leaf, and then create a leaf, right? They're all coming from a basal meristem. And what's interesting about plants that are basally meristematic is you can propagate them asexually through cloning, but you have to save that basal meristem. So basically I would come in here, and you can do this on an onion, leave the tops, and beets, thank you, that's the other one I was looking for. Absolutely, the bromeliad family, yep. So basal meristematic growth is completely different. It's not creating apical growth that continues to go north. It has its pocket of auxins down here. So if you want to propagate tubers, rhizomes, you can definitely do it through cloning, and usually it's done through division or through this type of a cut, or tissue culture. Potentially, yes. It would take a lot of babying and a lot of nursing around. I haven't tried it with a carrot. I don't know if anyone has, but I've done it successfully with an onion and with a pineapple. And I do like to use the hormones. Again, this is kind of a precarious situation, so I pull out all the big guns. All right.
One question about cannabis.
Yeah.
When you talked about the advantage of taking high or low clones. Let's say you have a plant this big, and you're going to take 15 or 20 clones out of it. Are you going to tend to concentrate on the middle, the bottom, the top?
Good question. So I'm going to step back, and I'm going to picture the growth habit. And I'm going to picture the potential growth habit that I want. So if it's a mother plant, or let's say it's going to be sent into flower in a few weeks, and I'm going to be scrogging it out on the screen, definitely want to make sure I have lots of branches. So if I come through and clone it to, high heaven and then try to send it into flower, I've removed all of that. But if I give it an opportunity and I use topping pruning cuts, I've increased the branch potential. I've increased the canopy potential for flower sites. Through pruning, I've opened it up to better circulation, more breathability, less bugs. So yeah, you want to follow your 30% budget, so don't remove more than 30% of mom at one time. And then try to take it evenly. For instance, you wouldn't want to just shave off half of one side of the plant, right? So even removal, I think, is a good way to go. But I'm a big fan of taking those top cuts because they always root out faster for me than the lower, older branches.
You mentioned that when you take branches, but you don't have what is it called, a node.
Yeah.
Can you suggest ways to improve your success? Because you don't have a node, where to cut
So, do you mean on the leaf branch or on a branch coming off the main?
Branch.
So, if it, what does it end in? Just one leaf, or does it end in new growth?
Oh, several different leaves. So I guess just use the same rule that you did for the main. Yeah.
Right, right. Although, I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm trying to stay focused, but you guys keep sending me really fun detours. This is a perfect example of what you're discussing on certain types of plants when you make the cut in a certain place. So this is a Hoya that we've rooted out. Interestingly enough, it has no node. So what we've done here is we've taken a petiole cutting. And again, the petiole is the leaf stem. Comes off the main trunk, ends in a leaf. That's the petiole. So this will never become a plant, ever. It will be a leaf forevermore. It's pretty interesting. Now this is just genetics and hormone pockets because we did not secure a node. We removed it from the trunk. There's no node between the petiole and the leaf. But because it's a vine and it has so many auxin hormones, and we ran it through a machine with Bigfoot, it rooted out. There's a nursery up in Portland that does this with the obovata variety. The obovata variety is a big circle. If you starve it for calcium, it mutates into a heart. So for Valentine's Day every year, this one nursery takes petiole cuttings of heart-shaped obovata Hoyas, and you can give it to your loved one. It'll never grow into a plant, but it'll always be a leaf. Yeah, there's genetics.
But
It's
it'll
fun.
stay alive? I mean, if you put that in the soil,
It
it'll
will.
just stay alive and just always be there?
It will.
I'll
Yes.
put it so.
But it becomes,
I personally haven't, but leaf cuttings? Yeah. Perfect segue into tissue culture. So many plants, you can, and the carrot is a perfect example of this. How many folks have heard of tissue culture? Yeah, a few in here? So this is asexual reproduction, and it's the most sterile technique there is. So rather than all the peroxide and the gloves and the don't cross-contaminate your life gel tips that I've shared with you today, this is very, very different. So basically you're taking a mature plant, you're taking a core sample of that plant. Now because this is a carrot in this example, the sample they're going to take is from the meristem, which is basal, which is in the tuber. So if I was going to be taking a tissue culture sample from a cannabis plant, I'll take it from a vegetative structure above ground. So again, this really illustrates the importance of where those auxin hormones are. So you basically take this cork sample, and the definition of a tissue culture is asexual reproduction of a stock plant in an artificial medium. And that artificial medium is generally what they call an agar solution in a petri dish. And you are growing an identical plant from this small core sample. It blows my mind. Now this puts a lot of great potential for mass production of cannabis clones. We have a lot of producers right now selling recreational and medical clones for the dispensaries. With that is coming a lot of mildew and bugs. I mean, when you have a canopy, the size of a 90,000 square foot warehouse, pest population, disease population are out of control. So this is much safer for distribution, for in-house cross-contamination risks. It's not cheap. You have to have a lab-like environment. It has to be a sterile environment to pull this off. But it's a very, very viable technique for the commercial producer. There's one more step right here I just wanted to go over. But basically, we talked about auxins a lot. And I may have put this on your handout, but there is a proper auxin to cytokinin ratio to tell the plant what to do. Now, if that ratio is 1:1, it's going to tell it to start creating like a callus. If the ratio is 10:1 in the third figure, then it tells the plant the information now is to grow a root system. And so you can manipulate the auxin to cytokinin ratio. This kind of stuff is really high level and sometimes makes my head spin, but really what it comes down to is the right hormone at the right time to the right plant. And all those products out there on the market do contain those hormones and give you a nice jump start. So this is really fun. Way back when we used to sell tissue culture kits, and I never had a chance to play with them, but they are available if anybody's interested, let me know. And I did want to leave you with a few other resources here. So the Oregon State Extension Service is a great resource, especially if you are having problems cloning that beloved apple tree. The Master Gardeners have a Monday through Friday clinic that they hold on 10th and Jefferson, and you can also call in or email them pictures or questions, and they do a great job of helping you with troublesome propagation issues. The urban farm I mentioned all the time. Has anybody been there? It is so wonderful. It's by the Mill Run, over by campus, off of Franklin. They have a volunteer work exchange program, so if you come and weed the carrot patch for an hour, you can take home whatever you want in a basket. This is where I found my white mulberry, on that urban farm campus. So lots of goodies, and they always need help, and they have a lot of goodies to share. We do have one book on our shelf that I really like for cloning. It's the big purple one by Jorge Cervantes. It's a bit of an investment, but it's one of my favorite technological horticultural books I've ever seen. Great pictures, really good how-to steps. If you're a picture person like me, it'll give you macro shots of a lot of what we discussed today. Oh, and then I threw up a website from UC Davis. This is also on different forms of asexual propagation. So if you go to that link, it'll give you information on layering, divisions, and also cloning as well. So really good resources there. And before I finish, I just want to make sure I didn't leave any questions. There's a few more products I know I wanted to show folks. We talked a little bit about aloe vera, thank you, last month. So this is a really inexpensive cloning gel, and it really helps seal cuts. So after you make your cutting and you've got your glove on, give it a little squeeze, boom. That's my 1/4 cent cloning gel right there. It's full of enzymes and growth hormones. It's a really great stimulator. And I think I've passed my slide on this, but someone mentioned willow bark, I think it was Evan. So I had an image of a bundle of willow bark. Right now is a great time to go down to the rivers or early spring and harvest a bunch of twigs from the willow tree. They're very rich in salicylic acid. And salicylic acid is another very important growth hormone that regulates plants. So you can make willow teas, you can make aloe teas, people do seed extract teas. All those enzymes and hormones will jumpstart this process. Any questions about that? All right, do y'all feel like you made a successful cut today? That was my goal. Awesome. I'm so pleased to hear it. And join us next month. So we were going to do fertilizing and flushing, but after our compost tea class, I got a lot of requests to do fermented plant extracts. So this is a perfect time to be feeding your outdoor girls high levels of phosphorus, and next month I want to teach you guys all the different things you can use in your backyard to make your own fermented plant extract teas.
When you say high, how high?
High?
How high?
For what?
Phosphorus.
Oh, if it's organic, 10 to 12% on the label. If it's synthetic, you're going to see some scary numbers like 45, 50.
Well, isn't the dried soluble, like isotopes up around 11?
And I looked a little closer. You know how they're achieving that? It's potassium hydroxide. So that's not from the kelp. And it is a synthetic pH stabilizer. So, you know, there's and again, folks, these are synthetically produced hormones. The one that I gave you today is synthetic. So as a gardener, if you're organic, you do have some decisions to make in the early phases. I would say 99.9% of the organic farmers I work with use a synthetic gel to start the process. Are there trace amounts at the end of the season? Absolutely not. Did it jumpstart and give you a really healthy clone out the gate? Yeah. Because it is true that if you have a weakling from day one, you're going to have that underdog the whole time you're sending into flower. Sometimes the underdog wins the race, though, because it's a fight for the finish line to reproduce. But 9 times out of 10, you want to avoid stress.
How does the aloe vera compare with
I have people who no longer buy gel, and they bought a $1.99 aloe vera plant at Jerry's, and they got free hormone for life now. It works really well. I've never personally done a side-by-side, but I encourage you to do it with your particular strain and see which technique works faster. And I did want to just go over a few most common mistakes, so I don't miss that. I think a lot of us learned today that cutting in the right place is the most important. I have worked with a lot of customers over the years who make the cut above the node, which means you've just lost the pocket, and now you've got a stump that's going to rot. Sometimes it will root out from that next node up, but you're dealing with a lot of pathogens in the meantime. Dirty pruners, we all pass these around and our scalpels around today. It's very important that you clean in between plants, or in between plant parts, if you know there's a pathogen or a pest especially present. Old cloning solutions, I'm so glad we got to this. You guys, this stuff goes bad fast. Keep it in the fridge. Not the freezer, but the fridge is a perfect temperature for storage. After 6 months on my shelf, success rate completely drops off. So when people come in and they say, hey, I want to take 30 cuttings this month, don't buy the 100 milliliter.
It will go bad before you get to your next round. This will easily do 30 or 40 cuttings, especially if you use my paper towel trick. Again, more is not necessarily better, and we often tend to over-love our plants, so you can keep it a little cheaper on that end. Keep nitrogen out of the picture unless you're using a nitrogen-fixing bacteria that's regulating uptake, because you'll get this really vigorous top leafy growth with no root system to support it, and it'll literally top in mid-season.
Explain one more time how you introduce the azos into the plant.
Yeah, so in my reservoir with the pump turned off, I'm going to do a couple tablespoons in that reservoir, and it'll kind of sit on top and take a minute to go into solution. So I'll mix it real good, maybe a little bit of yucca to break that surface tension, and then once it is soluble, so once it's in place, at that point the machine will recirculate it through the sprayers, or in the case of your plugs, get your big bowl, a couple tablespoons per couple gallons, and then soak your cuttings in the azos. Now, I wouldn't do the soaking per se, because I don't believe without a root system in soil, they're going to fix nitrogen, and they're not going to take that bacteria up their xylem and do anything good with it. But soak your cuttings or put it in the reservoir. Perfect. All right, and then humidity, you guys, is everything. So 9 times out of 10, it's too high or too low. You got to get that sweet spot. This will be written on your handout, 60 to 90% humidity. Now, as soon as you remember that little knuckle we saw on my mulberry? As soon as I see that, I'm gonna pull the dome off. And if I see them wilt, dome will go back on. But I do want to start acclimating them to regular humidity levels as quickly as possible. So I've got a few little roots there. This is gonna pop off. I'm gonna keep them evenly moist until they completely consume that plug, and I can see them on the exterior. That's when you remove them. Along the way, you can give them a little tug to see if they're anchoring. That's a really good indicator. But if they're anchored but they haven't actually created a root zone in this, transplanting is going to be very, very tentative. So I like to be able to see a profusion of roots before I pull the plug.
Okay, so what if you're not using the plug and you're just using that?
Sure.
How big would you let it work?
I would want to see a structure. So I would want to see, 6 to 8. I'd want them to be dangling. You don't want like this, 8 to 10 inch skinny straw-like root structure. You want to see fine feeders and branching. If you're seeing those straws, they're really fighting to transport water and they're not focusing on feeding the plant at that time. You do see that in cloning machines sometimes. The Hoya is a good example too. I don't have any branches on that structure, and that's a vine that will throw out advantageous roots and climb my wall if I want it to. So that's why we're seeing structures like that. But yeah, here's a decent example back here. So here's a cleome cutting we took 2 weeks ago. So do you remember my whole metaphor is as is below, so shall be above? This structure's smaller than the canopy. This is too small to transplant. I want to make sure this is in proper ratio to this before I plug it. Oh, and then the last step.
So you want them to be maybe 3 inches, 2.5 inches?
Yeah, let's say 3.5 to 4 inches, and I want to see more girth. Now I am getting some feeder hairs, so this is good. Now if I was going to the coast for a week and I just had to transplant, I could. But what I would do is take my mycorrhizae, and I would give it a nice little sprinkle like that, and make direct contact. Do you guys remember using mycorrhiza, or is this new to some folks? It's a beneficial fungus that colonizes on your root system and helps with water and nutrient uptake. The largest pumpkin that was ever grown in the world was grown with mycos by Extreme Gardening. Great for all warm season annual plants. And mycorrhiza is also famous for being an incredible phosphorus solubilizer. That's why I like to put it right on the roots before my first transplant to get that healthy root system for the next season. And I like these powdered sugar shakers. I just get these at the dollar store or at the kitchen department. They're great for your diatomaceous earth. They're great for any kind of a powdered microbial inoculant that you're working with. And then lastly, temperatures again, being too low or too high, you want to stay in that 70 to 75 degree sweet spot if possible. I have really good luck at 72 if you can monitor that. And then just making sure you're timing your cuttings correctly so that if you do have to take cuttings off a flowering plant this month, then you have given yourself enough time to nurse it along through that process and then bring it back to a vegetative state. Perfect. Any last minute questions? I did a lot of talking today. I really appreciate your attention, coming out here on this gorgeous Sunday afternoon to help learn how to bring new life force with us at Constant Gardener. Thanks for joining us, and come back next month for fermented plant extracts.
And have you thought about